The moment I saw my brother whispering to a man in a gray suit at my dad's 70th birthday party, pointing at me across the room while my dad was still blowing out his candles, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not panic, just the quiet, certain knowledge that whatever my brother had been planning for the past 8 months, it was starting tonight. My brother is 5 years older than me. His name is Liam, and for most of my life, I genuinely looked up to him. He's the kind of person who fills a room, loud laugh, strong opinions, the one who always knew what to order at a restaurant and made you feel slightly better about yourself for having asked. Growing up in Kelowna, he was the golden child in the way that firstborn sons in certain families just are. My dad poured a lot of himself into Liam. The hockey registrations, the business school applications, the cosign on his first condo. I wasn't resentful about it. I was just quieter. I went to nursing school in Vancouver, came back home after graduation, and took a job at the hospital 20 minutes from my parents' house. I liked being close to them. Liam liked being close to them. Liam liked being close to the idea of them. He moved back to Kelowna 4 years ago after his second business venture didn't work out. By then, my dad had already been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's, and someone needed to step in and help with the family's property management company. 3 apartment buildings and a small strip mall my dad had built up over 30 years. Liam offered. My dad was relieved. I thought it was a good thing. I really did. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Liam had walked into that company the same way he walked into everything, with total confidence and absolutely no guardrails. My dad had given him signing authority over the business accounts within the first 6 months. It made sense at the time. Dad's hands were getting worse, and Liam was there, available, and he had a business degree. My mom had passed away when I was 19, so there was no one else to weigh in. I was working 12-hour shifts. I trusted my brother. My dad trusted his son. The will came up the summer my dad turned 68. He mentioned it casually, the way he mentioned most serious things. Sideways, over coffee, like he was talking about the weather. He said he'd updated it with the family lawyer in Kelowna and that he wanted me to know I was listed as the primary beneficiary for the property company, not Liam. Me. I was stunned. I asked him why, and he got very quiet for a moment and said, "Because you're the one who shows up, Reese." He called me Reese. My name is Teresa, but he'd called me Reese since I was about 4 years old. I had to look out the kitchen window for a second so he wouldn't see my face. He didn't say anything else about it. Neither did I. And I made the mistake of assuming Liam didn't know. He knew. I have no idea how. Maybe Dad told him directly, thinking it would motivate some kind of honest conversation. Maybe the lawyer's assistant mentioned it. Maybe Liam had just been paying attention in a way I hadn't anticipated, but he knew, and from what I can piece together now, he had been quietly laying groundwork for months before that birthday party. The first sign was the family dinner in February when Liam started bringing up Dad's confusion in conversation. Not in an alarmed way. In a concerned, measured, reasonable-sounding way. "Dad got a bit turned around today when I was explaining the Q3 numbers," he'd say. Or, "I'm not sure he fully remembered signing off on that maintenance invoice." He said these things gently, and because we all loved Dad and were genuinely worried about his Parkinson's progression, we listened. We nodded. We worried together. I started noticing that Liam was CCing himself on Dad's medical appointment confirmations, emails that went to the family account I had access to too. At first I assumed it was just him being thorough. Then I realized he was building something. A paper trail. A narrative. The second sign was in April when my dad's accountant, a woman named June who had worked with our family for 15 years, called me out of the blue. She said she'd been asked by Liam to hand over the full business financial records going back 7 years, citing a transition in management. She was calling me because she wanted to confirm this was legitimate. I told her I'd call her back. I called Liam. He said it was routine. He said Dad had asked for it. He said I was being paranoid. I went over to Dad's that evening. He was watching hockey and eating the soup I'd brought him the day before, warmed up in his good pot. I sat down and asked him, as casually as I could manage, whether he'd asked Liam to pull the financial records. He looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "Why would I do that? June sends me the quarterly summary every 3 months. That's all I need. I didn't sleep well that night. I want to be honest about what happened next because I think this is the part people get wrong when they hear these kinds of stories. I didn't immediately hire a lawyer or call anyone or do anything dramatic. I did what most people do when they suspect something terrible but can't quite make themselves believe it. I went back to work, took on an extra shift, and spent about 6 weeks hoping I was wrong. I was not wrong. The thing that finally made me act wasn't something I discovered myself. It was my dad's accountant again. June called me for the second time in July, and her voice was different this time. More careful. She said she'd been reviewing some of the records Liam had submitted for what he'd told her was an internal audit, and she'd found several transactions that didn't match the invoices she had on file. Maintenance payments to contractors who didn't appear in any of the building records. Wire transfers to a numbered company she couldn't trace. A pattern of small withdrawals just under the $10,000 reporting threshold. A technique she recognized, she said, because she'd seen it once before with another client, years ago. She used the word structuring. I had to Google it when I got off the phone. Structuring is when someone deliberately breaks up financial transactions to avoid triggering automatic reporting requirements under Canada's Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre regulations, FineTrack. It's not just a civil matter, it's a federal offense. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for about 20 minutes after that call. Then I called a lawyer. The lawyer I found was a woman who specialized in estate and business litigation in Kelowna, and she was calm and systematic in a way I desperately needed someone to be at that point. She told me a few things I needed to hear. First, that what June had described, if accurate, was serious. Second, that because my father still had legal capacity, and he did, his Parkinson's had not progressed to cognitive impairment, he could direct the next steps. And third, that any legal challenge to the business's current management would be stronger if we acted before my dad's birthday in November. That was the date, she explained, because Liam had apparently filed paperwork the previous spring attempting to have himself named my father's financial power of attorney. The application was still pending. I hadn't known about the application. My dad hadn't known either. When I showed my dad the lawyer's summary of what we'd found, sitting at his kitchen table, which is the same kitchen table we'd had since I was 12, with the same ceramic rooster my mom had put on the windowsill, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, in the flattest voice I'd ever heard from him, "Get it all." We got it all. June cooperated fully. She provided every record she had, going back to the moment Liam had taken signing authority. Our lawyer engaged a forensic accountant, a quiet, meticulous man who billed by the 6-minute interval and whose preliminary report ran to 40 pages. And what that report showed was not subtle. Over 3.5 years, Liam had moved a total of just under $220,000 out of the property company through a combination of false invoices, payments to the numbered company, which was registered to a numbered holding entity in Alberta that, after some digging, was linked back to Liam through his former business partner, and the structured withdrawals June had identified. He had also signed 2 lease modifications on the strip mall that reduced the rental income below market rate, and the tenant in question was another numbered company with a similar trail leading back to him. The forensic accountant flagged the report to our lawyer, who filed a complaint with the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit. It was not a fast process. Financial crimes investigations in Canada rarely are, but it was thorough. Here's where my brother made his most spectacular mistake. Liam had apparently been worried all autumn that I was doing something. He didn't know what I knew or how much, but he could feel things shifting. My dad was less available to him, the accountant had stopped responding to his requests, and I had stopped answering his calls with the same cheerful normality I usually managed. So in October, about 6 weeks before Dad's birthday party, Liam hired someone. Not a private investigator, exactly. A due diligence consultant. That was the phrase the man in the gray suit used when he later explained himself to my lawyer. Liam had hired him to look into me. Whether I'd manipulated Dad when he was vulnerable. Whether I'd unduly influenced the updated will. Whether there was anything, financial irregularity, professional misconduct, anything that could be used to challenge my position as beneficiary or my father's current decision-making capacity. The consultant was thorough, I'll give him that. He interviewed 3 of my former colleagues. He reviewed my social media history, He apparently requested records from the College of Nurses, which you can do, though they only release what's publicly available. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. I was a nurse who paid her taxes and showed up to her shifts and occasionally forgot to return library books. What he did find, because his investigation into my family connections naturally led him back to the property company and Liam's own financial activity, was the same pattern June had flagged. He was a due diligence consultant by trade, which meant he knew what he was looking at when he saw it, and because he was, as he later put it, not in the business of being party to ongoing financial crimes, he disclosed what he'd found. Not to Liam. To my lawyer, who he'd identified through the complaint filings that were by then part of the semi-public record. I found out about this on a Thursday afternoon in early November, 2 weeks before my dad's birthday. My lawyer called me and said simply, "The person your brother hired just handed us a second corroborating report." I had to sit down. The birthday party was my dad's idea. He knew by then what was coming. He had been briefed by our lawyer, he'd spoken to the RCMP liaison, and he had signed the documentation required to formally revoke Liam's signing authority and management role in the company. But he wanted to have the party anyway. He said he was turning 70 and he wasn't going to let Liam take that from him too. So we planned it. A dinner at the El Dorado, which is a hotel on the lake in Kelowna that my parents had gone to for their anniversary every year when I was a kid. 40 guests. My dad's oldest friends, his sister and her family, a few of his neighbors, people from the building association he'd been part of for 20 years. Liam was invited. Our lawyer advised us not to do anything at the dinner itself, and I had agreed. Whatever was going to happen would happen through the appropriate channels on the appropriate timeline. That was the plan. I should say, I had noticed Liam was tense when he arrived. He'd hugged my dad for a long time, which Liam didn't normally do. He'd shaken my hand instead of hugging me, which he'd never done before in his life. And then I'd watched him drift to the far side of the room and start talking to the man in the gray suit, and I understood in that moment that Liam still thought he had something, that the consultant had reported back to him too, or that Liam had found someone else, or developed another angle. He thought he had leverage. He thought tonight was the night he was going to use it. He stood up during the speeches. My dad's friend Gerald had just finished a genuinely lovely toast. Something about the time my dad drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to help him move a couch in 1987, and people were laughing and wiping their eyes, and Liam stood up. He said he had something to share. He said he'd recently come across some information that was difficult for him as a son to bring forward, but that he felt the family deserved to know. He said he had reason to believe my father's most recent decisions about the property company and about his estate had been made under undue influence. He said he had a report. He actually said he had a report. The room went very quiet. My dad's sister looked at me. I looked at my hands. My dad said quietly and clearly, "Go ahead, Liam." Liam started talking about the will, about the updated beneficiary designation, about the timeline of changes coinciding with my increased presence in Dad's life. He said he'd had a professional assessment conducted. He held up a folder. He was articulate and composed, and he had clearly rehearsed this. What he did not know, what he could not have known, was that my lawyer had contacted the gray-suited consultant 2 days before the party and confirmed, in writing, exactly what the consultant had disclosed and to whom. And what Liam also did not know was that my dad had asked June, that afternoon, to bring a printed summary of the forensic accountant's report. Not the full 40 pages, just the summary. 2 pages. Dad had folded it into the inside pocket of his blazer before we left for the restaurant. Liam finished his speech. He looked around the room with the expression of a man who believes he has just been very brave. My dad reached into his blazer pocket. He stood up slowly. His balance isn't great these days, but he stood up straight, and he put the 2 pages on the table in front of him, and he said, "I'd like to respond to that." He didn't raise his voice. My dad has never been a man who raises his voice. He just talked, in the same measured way he always talked, about what the forensic accountant had found and when and how. He talked about the numbered company in Alberta. He talked about the false invoices. He talked about $220,000 that had left the company his father had started and that he had spent 30 years building. He talked about the power of attorney application that Liam had filed without telling him. He said, "I love you, Liam. I have always loved you. But I need everyone in this room to know what you did." The man in the gray suit had already stood up and was heading toward the exit. Liam's face, by the end, was the color of the white tablecloth. The RCMP investigation concluded the following spring. Liam was charged under the criminal code with fraud over $5,000 and with offenses related to the structured transactions under the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act, a name that sounds more dramatic than the section he was actually charged under. But the charges were real, and they were serious. His lawyer negotiated. There was no trial. He entered a guilty plea in May and was sentenced to 2 years less a day, which in Canada means served in a provincial facility rather than a federal one, along with a restitution order for the full amount, $220,000, to be repaid to my dad's company over 10 years. The property company is fine. June is still the accountant. My dad hired a proper property management firm to handle the day-to-day operations, and I sit on the company's board in an advisory capacity, which mostly means I show up to quarterly meetings and ask questions and bring coffee. It is not a role I ever wanted. It is a role I'm glad someone is filling. My dad turned 71 last month. We had a smaller dinner this time. Just the family, his sister Gerald and his wife. No speeches. He and I did the dishes afterward, which is something we've done since I was old enough to hold a tea towel, me washing and him drying, which is backwards from how most people do it, and which I have never once pointed out to him. He said while he was drying a bowl, "I'm sorry you had to go through all of that." I said, "You went through it too." He said, "I know, but you're the one who made the call." I thought about June's first phone call and sitting in the hospital parking lot and the 40-page report, and the 2 folded pages in my dad's blazer pocket, and the gray-suited consultant who had been hired to bury me and had instead confirmed everything we already knew. I said, "I had hope." He put the bowl on the shelf and picked up another one, and we didn't say anything else about it, and the kitchen was warm and smelled like the soup I'd brought over the day before, and outside the window the lake was dark and very still. I keep thinking about the folded pages in my dad's blazer pocket. He put them there himself that afternoon before we left for the El Dorado. He didn't tell me he was going to do it. He just did it, quietly, the way he does most things, because he had spent 70 years watching what happens when good people stay silent at the wrong moment and decided he wasn't going to be one of them. That's not a small thing. That takes something most people don't talk about directly, a kind of moral backbone that doesn't come from being fearless. It comes from being clear on what you owe the people around you and what you owe yourself. What Liam did wasn't complicated when you strip it back. He found a situation where trust had been extended and he used that trust as a door. He walked through it slowly, carefully, in small enough increments that no single transaction would trigger an alarm. He was strategic and patient, and for a long time it worked. But the thing about building something on a lie is that you have to keep adding to the structure to keep it standing. More invoices, more shell companies, more careful manipulation of the people around you. Liam had to manage my dad's perception of his own memory. He had to manage what June saw and didn't see. He had to manage me. And eventually, the weight of all that managing became more than the structure could hold. When I sat in the hospital parking lot after June's second call, I wasn't brave. I was scared. I didn't want it to be true. And I really didn't want to be the one who had to do something about it. I think that's probably the more honest version of these stories that doesn't get told enough. The part before the decision, where you're just sitting in your car in a parking lot hoping you're wrong. What got me moving wasn't courage, exactly. It was the clearer fear. The fear of doing nothing and watching my dad lose 30 years of work to someone who had decided his own convenience was worth more than his family's trust. That felt worse than the alternative. I made the call. Then I kept making calls to June, to the lawyer, to the forensic accountant. And here is what I learned from all of it. The people who helped me most were not the dramatic ones. They were the methodical ones. June, who had noticed something was off and called me instead of looking away. The accountant who billed by the 6-minute interval and wrote 40 pages of careful, specific truth. My lawyer, who was calm on every phone call even when I wasn't. What won, in the end, was not a confrontation or a clever move. It was just the accumulated weight of accurate information, documented properly, shared with the right people. My brother brought in someone to dig up dirt on me, and that person found dirt on him instead. There's a version of that story where you call it luck or irony or karma. I don't think it was any of those things, really. I think it was just that the truth was already there. It had been there for 3.5 years, sitting in bank records and invoice files and transfer receipts. All that had to happen was for someone to look. Liam had hired someone careful enough to look. What I hope, if you're going to do something similar, if you're sitting in your own version of that parking lot, is that you let yourself be methodical rather than dramatic. Pay attention to the quiet signals. Call the person who noticed something. Find the professionals who bill by the 6-minute interval and trust the process even when it's slow. The truth doesn't need you to be fearless. It just needs you to keep showing up for it. And if you're lucky, you'll have a dad who folds 2 pages of evidence into his blazer pocket and stands up straight at his own birthday dinner to read them out loud. I'm very lucky.